Thank you again for coming to this series as we continue this series in Genesis. We're going to go back, as we look back in time to the previous sessions that we had, we saw that the world and the universe was created in a very perfect state, the opposite of the naturalism, and that it was been declining. Naturalism starts from a big bang, comes up, and gets more and more complex with time. The model in the scriptures is exactly the opposite. It was created perfect at the beginning. And we saw that perfection, man and woman in a very ideal state with God, a walking, talking relationship that was ruined because of disobedience and sin. That brought in a catastrophic failure for the universe, not only for man, he began to die, but all the universe, all the animals on the earth, everything in the earth, but the stars begin to burn out. God's relationship, that he had maintained this in a perfect state from the sixth day of creation on until this fall that we saw that took place in Genesis through the sin of man. God maintained the universe in a perfect state. The stars wouldn't have burned out. Man wouldn't have died. It was an ideal state. But with the entrance of sin, the disobedience, it brought this catastrophic fall. And as we saw, the law of the curse of entropy entered in. After that, though, they continued on. The world here wasn't totally destroyed. It was still a very beautiful world that man lived in, even though he had the seeds of death instilled in. And all of us, if we die a natural death, are dying slowly. The animals do, everything does. But what happens in that is that as we saw that, they had an ideal world to live in. There were no polar regions, no cold areas. They had, as our index fossils from all the layers up to almost the last one, the Pleistocene, all of them show that life around the world had about the same temperature. As it was in that state, what happened with man again? Did he learn from the first one? No. They went out and they committed immorality. And the consequence of that is what we saw led to the flood and the destruction of the whole face of the earth, all the land animals that existed, and they were wiped out. And as Noah and his sons and their wives merged from the ark, the world was a lot different than the world they'd entered the ark with. Now you had polar regions and you had a raging, at that time, ice age. As the oceans, they'll begin to cool down. And the volcanic action that was caused by the tectonic activity, pumping a lot of ash into the air and cooling the sun down, horrendous situations coming in from both poles. So the world was very harsh that they stepped out into. Gone was the atmosphere that they'd seen with the higher pressures so that the big animals could live, that they could live easier, grow to be long ages. Gone were the waters above that protected them from the radiation. It was a different world, very unpleasant compared to the one before, but man had to live with that. And that's the world that we're coming to in this session, the world that was after the flood. And you would think that man would have learned something. Don't sin. Don't sin. It caused us this great catastrophe in the beginning with Adam and Eve. And you say, well, how did they know about Adam and Eve? Because Shem would have known Lamech, his grandfather, and he knew Adam. So at the time of the flood, you have the things almost secondhand of what taken place before. But they come out of the ark, only 8 people left. And they're somewhat trapped in this zone in the hottest place on the earth, around Babylon. What we call Baghdad today is not very far from where Babylon is, and Nineveh wasn't very far away. And it's the warmest place on the face of the earth. And that's where they were. They're all of one language, and they begin to expand out. However, there's one more major change that's going to take place, and it's again the consequence of sin. Titled this thing, One World Rule. What it's about, this is the Tower of Babel story. It's in Genesis 11. It's a question of God's kingdom or man's governments. At the Tower of Babel, we have the first world government established. Before the flood of Noah, man had no governments. There were no police forces, no courts, no kings, no queens. There was no government before. It was a time of man's conscience. God hadn't ordained that. But after the flood, as a consequence of the flood, we have the Noahic covenant established, and under this, God gave man the rights of government with criminal laws such as blood for blood. If a man shed a man's blood, his life was to be taken from him. However, man sought to use this right, this privilege, to usurp God's kingdom with one world government run by men. And this is taken from Genesis 11, verse 1 and 2. Now the whole world was one language and one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar. It's an old term, by the way, for Babylon or Babylonia. And they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." And they made bricks for stones, and they had asphalt for mortar. Genesis 11:3. And they said, "Come, let us make for ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves. Let us not be scattered abroad on the face of the whole earth." Men are all unified at this point. They're one big family. They're all coming from these three sons of Noah. And Noah's there with them in this process. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, "Indeed, these people are one, and they have one language, and this is what they will begin to do. Now nothing that they propose will be withheld from them." Noah lived almost about to the time of the birth of Abraham, okay? Shem may have outlived Abraham. So all of their descendants, Shem, Japheth, Ham, and all their descendants are here at this event. There's only 352 years between the flood and the birth of Abraham. So they come out here and they're all gathered together. They're one big family. They're expanding like crazy as far as population. And they're come down to this plain of Shinar. It's a nice level place. There's no rocks there though. If you go to Babylon today, even in this day, and even in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, when they built something, it had to be made out of mud and bricks. The stones that you find there, they brought imported, and you'll find them at the turning posts on the doors. And it'll be inscribed on that what that building was for. But that's only stones. So these people don't have stones to build with, so they bake bricks out, and they use asphalt for mortar. But they're all together there. Noah's there with them. Shem's there. Ham's there. Japheth's there. They're all there together. Did they know what happened at the flood? Sure they did. All of them did. So they're coming together and they said, "We're going to make a great name for ourselves. We're going to work together." But what's God's evaluation of this? It's sin. Why? What's their sin here? We're going to make a name for ourselves. We're going to build a tower to heaven. And God comes down and says, nothing will be, if they're united like this, mankind, they'll be able to express themselves and sin, and they'll become the center of what is not right. Is this to worship God, this tower? No. Are they going to do honor to Him as the Creator and as their Lord and the one that saved them from the destruction of the world and the giants and the others before? No. The sin in its essence, is saying, I will for me become great. It was a sin of Satan. It was a sin of Adam and Eve. It was the sin of the people that lived before the flood, and it resurrects itself, its ugly self, in the same thing that's going to happen here. So they're going to build this tower, but God says it's not going to happen. We're going to divide them and put a language into there and confuse their language. Come, they say. God says, let us. And again, it's in the plural. You see the Trinity woven all through this thing? Let us make man in our image. Now it says, let us now go down and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speeches. It's divide and conquer. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore, its name is called Babel. You know where that comes from? It's like buzz is for bees. Babel is for speaking. Ba, 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 ba. What do you think the term barbarian comes from? Romans look at these people and say, burr, 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 you know. The Tower of Babel means that their language was confused, because the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of the earth. We didn't get our languages by evolution, from primitive grunts and everything. We were given good languages. And every language on the face of the earth is more primitive than it was 1,000 years ago. It's lost a lot of its grammar and structure. It's lost a lot of vocabulary. God makes everything good. Even in this causing the sin of man, he makes these languages very sophisticated, very complex, and very beautiful. We didn't get them. Again, it's the inverse of the naturalistic system. They say all men were primitive barbarians, cavemen. And they developed this sophistication. The scriptures teach the opposite. We got our language because of sin, but very sophisticated, and they're going downhill again. But this divided mankind. This is a resurrection. See in the background, the tower, they build these, they call them ziggurats, are out there, and there's a number of them out there in this plain. And this is one where they've reconstructed the entrance to the things. This is another one. This is God's judgment against man, his first attempt at what? A world government. He was to rule himself, but not to make himself so he's the God. At the Tower of Babel, you have a division of man by languages and races. We all, by the way, there's no basis for racism, because we're really all descendants of Adam, and more explicitly, descendants of Noah. So no race can say that they're superior. But God divided us by languages, and that led to races, because genetically we were very diverse. And up to this point in time, you could marry your sister. There was no implications against incest. Even at the time of Abraham, he's married to his sister. But the genetic defects have not come in, and they're not become so specialized that they couldn't marry. But all mankind is descended from Noah, his sons, Shem, or the Semites, Japheth, or the Indo-Europeans, and the Ham, or the Hamitic people. All languages of mankind were created by God at the Tower of Babel. And these languages divide men into three basic language groups according to the sons of Adam, and more explicitly Noah. All races of mankind are divided what? According to their languages. Also their descendants, again, they're sons of Adam and they're sons of Noah explicitly. The languages of mankind and the resulting races of mankind are designed what? To keep man divided and to prevent idolatrous worship. God gave it for that. He saw what would happen if we're united and we're evil. We'll use it to evil intents. However, men since the Tower of Babel are constantly trying to unite all people through large governments, whether it's kingdoms, empires, caliphates, etc., and more recently into one world government. I was reading a book recently on Einstein, and it was his big thesis in his thinking that if we were all one government, there wouldn't be national conflicts. But that's not the case. So the thrust has always been, they think that's a solution to world peace. That's what it's sold on. Actually, it's a direction to lead to world power for those that are in control. And it has always led to evil. Have you ever seen a big government or an empire or caliphate or a czar that was good? They all turn bad. And then their sons are bad, worse, and then it gets even worse. There's a story told about a man that in history is known as the tyrant of Syracuse. Syracuse is an island off of Italy. And this tyrant came in one day and into a temple, I don't know if it was Jupiter or who, and this woman was down on her knees praying to the God and saying, protect this man and keep him and all of his good health and everything. And he'd never heard of anyone that way because they hated him. So he walks up and to this woman and comes around to the front and he says, you're praying for me? She says, oh, yes. She said, before you there was a ruler, two rulers back, and he was an evil man, wicked man. And I came and prayed to the God, and he took him away and put another in his place, and he was worse than he was. And so I came and I prayed that the God would get rid of him, and he's gone. And now you've come. But she said, if I pray to get you away, another worse than you will come. So I'm praying for your good health. But that's the lineage of rulers. But that's what man's intent has been. It's been to get back to one world government where man is his own ruler. And you look at the communists and the socialists still, their deal is, if there's a God, and they're all atheists, they say, if God's really good, he wouldn't have set up a world like this with oppression and evil and poverty, but we're going to set up a government and we're going to eliminate those. We're going to do what God couldn't do. And all of them, I don't care if it's Hitler, Stalin, Mao, they're all the same. They're atheists, and they're going to set up a world government that's good for everybody, the utopias.